It is really my pleasure to welcome you all to today's Climate Capacity webinar. This is the second in our series of 5 webinars, which we will be providing virtually. And whether you are tuning in live or listening to the recording from today after the fact, thank you so much for being here and for joining us. My name is Lily, and I'm the Climate and Disaster Resilience Manager at SoCal Grantmakers, and I'm part of the wider Philanthropy California team. As I'm speaking, we know that there are about 145 people of you here, so if you feel comfortable, please feel free to place your name, your organization, your role, and if you're comfortable, your contact information in the chat. We do save the chat and can share it with everyone after our event if you're interested in connecting with one another. I want to tell you a little bit about Philanthropy California. Philanthropy California, as you may have heard, is an initiative of California's 3 major philanthropy-serving organizations. That includes ourselves at SoCal Grantmakers, Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial Counties, and Northern California Grantmakers. Our work focuses on key issues impacting our state, such as advancing equity, racial and gender justice, building an inclusive democracy, climate and disaster resilience, of course, and nonprofit sustainability. We have a membership across the state that consists of over 600 foundations, corporate funders, philanthropic individuals and families, giving circles, and government agencies. And our statewide climate and disaster resilience team includes myself, as well as other individuals from across this alliance. I'd love to introduce my team members who may or may not be in attendance. You might see their names in the chat. We have Carla Mercado, who is the Director of Philanthropy California, Megan Thomas, the President, CEO of Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial Counties, Kiran Kumar, Director of Climate and Disaster Resilience at Northern California Grantmakers, and Katie Oren, Climate and Disaster Resilience Manager of NorCal Grantmakers. So, what do we do around disasters? When disasters happen, like the recent storm events in San Diego, Ventura, and LA counties, our team supports the philanthropic sector in delivering critical information on nonprofit needs to funders. And we do this by vetting active disaster funds, connecting partners in government, philanthropy, and nonprofits, and coordinating funders across the state. This year, Philanthropy California deepened our partnership with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, or Cal-OES. And that led to the creation of this grant writing training series to build additional capacity for organizations just like yours serving frontline communities that are affected by climate change and disasters. But very importantly, outside of just disaster response, we also focus our efforts on overall resilience for communities during non-disaster times. With billions of federal dollars becoming available through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, we find ourselves in a once-in-a-generation moment for philanthropy to help equitably invest in the capacity of communities to envision, plan, and implement projects together. So while there's a state of urgency to get these dollars out the door and into communities' hands, there's also a need to build capacity, relationships, and partnerships to catalyze meaningful systems change at the speed of trust that we tend to talk about in this space. And we know through our work that qualifying for receiving and managing disaster assistance can be extremely burdensome for small to mid-sized nonprofits, especially BIPOC-led and tribal organizations. So, as part of this initiative, in 2024, we'll be delivering 8 in-person regional trainings. So we will be going to communities and holding in-person initiatives just like these there. The next 3 coming up will be in Ventura, Imperial County, and the Inland Empire. And we expect to have more trainings in NorCal and the dates and locations will be announced on our website, which we will share in the chat. We'll have 5 total virtual trainings. Like I mentioned, this is the second one, and the rest will happen through April and May. We're also offering with our partners at Gary Bess Associates one-on-one appointments to work with grant writing professionals for direct assistance. So if you are planning to apply for a grant, or if you are in the process of applying to a grant, you can reach out and set up a one-on-one appointment for consultation. And all of this is free of charge through our Climate Capacity Program. We really encourage you to stay in touch through our mailing list to learn more about these future trainings, and we really hope to be a resource to you. I'm going to pause because I've said a lot about our organizations, I've said a lot about our team, but today is really about you. So we have a little bit of an interactive exercise. We have a lot of people in attendance. I do see the chat going off. I hope you continue to introduce yourselves to one another. If you are able to use gallery view, that will allow you to see everyone else who is in attendance. And if you feel brave, and if you'd like to, this is optional, you can come on camera for a little bit of an interactive exercise so we can learn a little bit more about each other. And so also I can learn who I'm talking to. So I'm not just talking to my camera and my other screen. Okay, so you can either raise your hand on camera so I can see, or you can use a thumbs up emoji like this to answer yes to these questions that I will be asking. So just to start, this is a warm-up question. Who is joining us from Northern California? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of NorCal in the virtual room. This is exciting. I see some thumbs up as well from our participants off camera. All right, who is joining us from Central California? Okay, some, not quite as many. Oh yeah, Janelle, I see you. Great. And then I'm a little bit biased towards this, but who is joining us from Southern California? Yay. Okay, I see you. Michelle, Diane, nice to see you. Great. Rosa, wonderful. Okay, we've got, oh, Rebecca, thank you. Wonderful. Okay, that was a warm-up question. Oh, actually, who is here representing a tribe or a tribal organization? Nancy, I see your hand raised. Great. All right, next question. Who is joining us for a climate capacity training for the very first time? Nice, okay. Lots of you are joining for the very first time. Sammy, Luisa, thank you. Wonderful. It's very nice to have you. And okay, so this is so we can get a sense for our presenters. Whose organization has applied for a government grant before? Okay, quite a bit of hands. And then who has never applied for a government grant or a grant before? There are some here who have a little less experience with grants. So that's wonderful for today because that's the point of the training. We hope to help you build capacity in that area. And then I would love to see a show of hands for anyone in the room who might feel brave enough to share a little bit on camera, off camera, it doesn't matter, but to come off your microphone and be able to share with your voice in the room what you hope to get out of this webinar today. I do see a couple hands raised. I'm not sure if that's from not lowering your hand, so I might actually just call on you if that's okay. Shelley, I see your hand up. Are you able to tell us a little about what you hope to get out of today's training?
Sorry, I forgot to put my hand down.
That's
So I'm happy
okay.
to share. So this is my first time attending this training on behalf of the Buddhist City Foundation. So we did receive federal and state grants before and also from Cal OES, but we also hope to increase our capacity by learning about how to strengthen our proposal and program design and evaluation process so that we can seek more funding resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I just saw your hand raised, but I'm really grateful that you shared with the room why you're here. It's great to have your participation. Great to know about your connection with Cal OES as well. And then maybe I'll take one more. Beatriz, I see your hand up. Would you like to come off mic and share?
Yes, the part of the training, I guess the name, knowing your community and identifying needs. I've been writing grants for a while, but I think it's always good to revisit trainings and learn how to gather additional information and maybe new ways that I haven't heard before.
Thank you so much, Beatriz. And it's wonderful to be able to offer a space for people to revisit grant writing and, going back to those fundamentals is always important. You never know what you will remember or what you'll learn again. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure there's more. I encourage you to continue the conversation in our chat. But at this point, I would love to pass it back to our team at GBA to lead our training. It's really nice to see and meet you all. Sarah, back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Lily. That was great. It was great to see everyone. I put my view on gallery view and saw all of you come on camera and raise your hands. Thank you for that. Let me share today's slides. Okay. This is Sarah speaking again, and I'm introducing the teaching part of our presentation, our grant writing curriculum. As Lily said, this is webinar 2 in a series of 5. Our first one back on January 31st gave an overview called Foundations of Grant Writing. And today we're looking at the first 2 sections that you'll encounter in basically any grant proposal that you're writing: organizational capability and statement of need, which are circled on the slide here. This slide is one that we'll come back to again and again. It shows the parts of a proposal, and we'll be looking at each one in detail and showing you how to connect the dots between them in telling the story about community need and your organization's plan for an effective program to meet those needs. That's the story of a grant proposal. But we'll also be drawing connections between the needs and requirements that it takes to create a proposal, writing it, and delivering it to a funder, and the capacities for grant writing and program planning that exist within your organization. That's part of the capacity building that we're talking about as well. Our first topic in today's presentation is organizational capability, building on mission, values, and focus. Diane Royal is our presenter, and she's a colleague of mine at Gary Bess Associates, where she's one of our senior grant writers. Her background is in public health, and she has a commitment to advancing health equity that I can see all the time in our work together, and I really appreciate it. She's also very wise about grant writing capacity and program capacity, the ability to make those things happen inside your organization. And she'll be talking about some of those perspectives today. Diane, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you so much, Lily, for that opening exercise. It was really lovely to see everyone. My name's Diane Royal, and I'd like to introduce the concept of organizational capability as a foundational component of proposal development. Understanding your organization's mission, values, and focus will help you identify a funding opportunity that is feasible for your organization and builds off of existing expertise in order to increase your chances of an award and better ensure program success should you be awarded funding. Next slide, please. I'd like to start with a friendly reminder that you are the expert in your organization. Allow this expertise to shine through in the funding opportunities you apply for, as well as the ways in which your proposal is written. Grant seeking and proposal development are not magic. Even if you're new to grant writing, you have the most important foundation: knowledge of your organizational capability. Next. With this knowledge, you already have the tools to quickly assess any funding opportunity that comes across your inbox or desk. The first question you can ask yourself during this early review process is, does the opportunity fit my organization's mission and direction? If yes, then you can think further with, is the opportunity supportive of my organization's values and focus? We call this process making go, no-go decisions, or determining if you should move forward with applying to an opportunity or not. Now, some of you might be thinking, this all sounds well and good, but organizationally, we just need to expand our grant efforts. In fact, saying no to an opportunity can be really powerful. First, it demonstrates that you're approaching each opportunity with thoughtfulness. And it also importantly leaves your capacity open to say yes and move forward with an application that might better align with your organization's direction. For most folks on this webinar, grant seeking and writing is not likely your primary role, as it's just one of your many hats. Selecting best fit opportunities may be the most effective and efficient use of your time. Similarly, you do not need to go at these go, no-go decisions alone. This is a process that is really conducive for group settings where everyone has the opportunity to weigh in on the 2 questions on this slide. Simply asking team members, hey, should we apply for this opportunity, might yield all yeses, but framing opportunities with these 2 questions may produce more thoughtful responses in a team setting. As many of you on this webinar are seeking to expand your grant work, a note that organizations that fully own the process of grant seeking and proposal development, meaning that it becomes a shared responsibility across multiple staff members, have a greater chance of sustained success. Above all, the aim is to foster a proactive rather than a reactive approach to funding opportunities, and it will also help establish reasonable expectations for the next steps in the proposal development. Next, please. Thanks. Both of the questions on the previous slide are getting at immediate, midterm, and longer-term organizational planning. As you all know, it can be many months after a proposal submission before you hear back from the funder. As organizations are ever evolving, and this includes shifting staffing, assessing an opportunity can consider the here and now while also being forward-thinking. Whenever I'm writing an application, I always like to imagine that a brand new staff member 12 months from now is being handed the proposal narrative, the submitted budget, the notice of award, and is being tasked with implementing this newly awarded program. Would there be an immediate and clear connection to them just sort of perusing the proposal documents and knowing very little about the organization as to how this program ties into the mission, values, and focus? Next slide, please. I also want to acknowledge that opportunity selection always teeters on a fine line of feasibility. And this may look different for each organization represented on this webinar. For example, you may sit within an organization that has an abundance of opportunities that fit your organization's mission, values, and focus. And therefore, you may have to be more discerning and selective about which you ultimately apply for. Or you may be a part of an organization that needs to broaden your focus just slightly in order to be able to consider more opportunities and facilitate growth. In both cases, and for all of those in between, the immediate question when assessing an opportunity might be, do we have sufficient time, staffing, and other resources to be able to pursue this opportunity? But going back to the newly hired staff member who may be tasked with implementing a newly awarded program, you may also want to consider them when you ask yourself the question on this slide. Do we have sufficient time, staffing, and other resources to be able to implement this opportunity should we be awarded funding? Time poverty, staffing gaps, and other resource shortages are likely a reality for many of you here today. So devoting precious time and resources to funding opportunities that are feasible for your organization and in alignment with your mission, values, and focus more efficiently utilizes your time in selecting opportunities to apply for, increases your chances of an award, and better ensures program success should you be awarded funding. Next. So, you've thoughtfully selected an opportunity to apply for, all while considering your mission, values, focus, and the ever important concept of feasibility. What now? At the start of the proposal process, one of my first narrative steps is to copy and paste the funding opportunities purpose statement into my proposal template, or even a blank document will do. And to be clear, I mean the purpose statement found within the notice of funding opportunity, not your organization's purpose statement if you have one. Because then I copy and paste my organization's mission statement and just write a simple connecting sentence between the two. Aside from the fact that this moves you beyond staring at a blank sheet of paper, because we all know that starting a proposal is the hardest part, it serves two purposes. First, this exercise is a signal to yourself that reinforces the why behind this application and ensures that all the time and thought that you put into the go, no-go decisions we just discussed still holds true. It also helps you to start to build the case within your application that you have the organizational credibility and capability needed to ultimately implement this project or program, should it be selected for funding. Next slide, please. Another practical tip is to reinforce organizational credibility throughout your application's narrative. So beyond deliberately connecting the opportunity's purpose statement with your organization's mission statement, also consider weaving in what I like to call nods to further underscore your capability. Of course, some opportunities ask you to respond to specific questions that give you space to tout the topics on this slide. But in the event you're not prompted to do so, you may still want to ensure that these topics make it into your application narrative. These include reference to your organization's history, your most recent or significant accomplishments, the resources, including experience or expertise that you'd bring to the proposed project, the ways in which you managed similar projects previously, and your experience and familiarity with populations of focus. As you do more and more grant writing, these are the kinds of topics that you can reference across grants, even if opportunities have different points of emphasis. So in this way, by investing in language that reinforces capability, you are also building up your internal template language that you can continue to refer back to, which increases your organizational capacity. Taken together, the components on this slide may be single sentences throughout your application, reminding the reviewer of why you'd be a good fit. But they ultimately help establish and ground an application in organizational credibility. Final slide, please. In my experience, folks working in this field have a really strong sense of purpose, and there's a deep and experiential knowledge of what an organization has to offer. Your organization was founded in the context of a community and may be in direct response to a community need. It's likely that this is intrinsically built into the history of your organization. Maria, in the next presentation, will be talking about needs assessments and how to further make your case now that you have identified a funding opportunity that is feasible for your organization and in alignment with its mission, values, and focus. As you continue to build on existing expertise, a reminder that you have the most important foundation, knowledge of your organizational capability. And with that, I turn it back to Sarah. Happy to take questions as they come in.
Great. Thank you, Diane. This is our brief section for questions and answers about what Diane just presented on organizational capability. I see a hand raised. I would like to invite Beatrice Moreno to unmute and ask your question to the group.
Thank you. I guess I was going to ask in the last slide with the reinforcing capability throughout the grant proposal, one of the items you have listed there are resources. Could you just expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, of course. So I think I oftentimes think about this question, and you can also think about this question in terms of kind of what's making up your budget, right? And the first thing that I always like to think of is people. So in terms of resources, what is the people who are working on your project or program staff, what is their level of expertise and experience doing something similar? And what do they kind of bring to the table? I think really, I oftentimes think of resources within regards to people and their experience and expertise. Of course, you can also bring in, other experiences that you may have or particular resources that your organization has developed. Maybe you have a curriculum or training or something to offer the community. But I think if you're really looking for a starting place or, just sort of something to get your thoughts flowing, I like to think about that with regards to people.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.
I see a raised hand from Raquel Pinderhughes. Please unmute and ask us your question.
Thank you so much. This is fantastic. Yes, I'm interested in understanding when we're trying to make the case about our organizational capacity, is that case best made with numbers that show impact or narrative? And how do you kind of balance the numbers and the narrative, or the numbers and the story when you're trying to talk about your history and your impact?
And so it's a really meaningful question that I think a lot of us face at the start of every proposal, just to be clear. And you're also talking to sort of the right person in that I'm a trained data scientist, but I'm also an anthropologist. So I love numbers, but I also think it's so important to have the undercurrent of a narrative and stories, right, that you're experiencing as an organization. I think it's a fine line, and I oftentimes go into the notice of funding opportunity and I look to see what the funder is seeking in terms of how to sort of measure success or demonstrate that you have the capability to do that. And I think it should really be a balance of both. I think it should be a narrative component that talks about your organization's capacity and contributions, with also some numbers tied in there just to show impact. And just to say, Maria's going to talk about this too, but every community is different. So, a number needs to mean something within the context of the community that it sits within and within the organization as well. So I think short answer is it really needs to be a combination of both. And just really, I think that's really the most important starting point. I hope that answered your question. Good.
Another question. I love this question because it's about organizational capacity and how it connects to grant writing. It's how do you get started implementing the process of having go, no-go decisions if your organization doesn't currently do something like that?
Thank you, Sarah. This is Diane again, happy to answer. So in terms of getting started implementing go, no-go decisions with an organization that might not currently have anything like this, I think I would first maybe note that you perhaps subconsciously have the foundation that you need.
Mhm.
You're probably reviewing opportunities as they come across your inbox or your desk, and you're already like filtering out those in some way, shape, or form, whether or not you know it, or you have a sophisticated matrix that you're following. So I think at the beginning of my presentation, I just sort of put two questions up on the screen where you can ask yourself if the opportunity fits your organization's mission or if it fits your organization's direction, really thinking about the here and now as well as the future. And so I think just asking these two questions is a really good starting point for establishing go, no go practices. And it pushes you to think about it. But I think more importantly, it pushes your team members to think about it. Because as I said, if you're just sending out, a link to an opportunity or a quick summary and saying, hey, should we apply to this? Everyone's going to say yes if you're in a grant seeking environment. But asking others and really training others on how to do that builds your internal capacity to have that filter. If you want like a really quick way to do it, I actually really look at the application deadline or due date as my very first step. And I know that for me, I like to give myself at least 3 weeks to prepare an application, and even for applications that are lighter lift, because you really have to take into account project conceptualization and drafting, as well as the amount of time that your team needs to provide feedback. So um, if you're like me, it almost always takes longer than you think. And really kind of putting that filter on as well, and is kind of helping manage your internal capacity and then capacity of your team members. I hope that answers the question.
This is Sarah. I want to add a few thoughts about that. I have worked in organizations where we had go, no go meetings as part of our process. So it was a place in people's day and they're on their calendar where we came, we evaluated the opportunity together, and we had kind of a shared organizational understanding of there would be a moment of decision. And it worked really well to have the understanding that that decision needed to be made, that not every opportunity was an automatic yes. It was really helpful to have that built into our schedules.
This is Diane again. I think that's a wonderful example. And I really like these trainings, and that I think it's important for folks to be able to maybe just go back to their organizations with one action item, right? I sat on this training today. It took an hour out of my workday. Here's what I got out of it, and here's what I want to implement, right? Something really practical and tangible that justifies, your time here today, which is important and valuable. And so I think that's a great example of just a simple thing that you can do is implement a go, no go meeting where you talk about all of these different pieces and help you and your teammates get that capacity to filter.
This is Sarah. There's one more question in the chat box. What's a tip you can provide to smaller organizations in regard to reinforcing capabilities if they might not have a full scoop on resources, for example, people, to be competitive in the grant they seek?
That's a great question. And I've worked for and written grants for smaller organizations, and it's it's a very powerful experience because you are very, very nimble. Small organizations tend to be able to be really nimble and obviously passionate about what you do with kind of strong interrelations and kind of team building. And so again, those are big picture. But I think really emphasizing a smaller organization's nimbleness and ability to kind of pivot, and that can be a really strong starting point, I think, and definitely not to be intimidated by going up against larger organizations, because you really never know what the funder is looking for. You may have the exact mission value and focus that that funder is looking for. And that's kind of irregardless of organization size. So I would encourage absolutely to continue to apply. Just know that you might need to be more selective in terms of applying for opportunities that align with your mission, values, and focus. I don't know if Sarah, if you have anything to add to.
Nope, nothing to add right there. This is Sarah speaking again. And in our agenda, I need to move us along to the next item. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for your questions. Thank you, Diane, for your answers and discussion. We're moving on now to our short break. This will be 5 minutes long. During that time, please also take a look at the poll questions that will be shared as a pop-up on your screen, whether before you leave or when you come back. There are 3 questions, so scroll down in the box if you can't see them all. We'll review the group's answers when we come back, but your answers won't be visible as belonging to you. They'll only be combined with the whole group. So enjoy your short break, 5 minutes. I'll call you back. That's been about 5 minutes. I will ask folks to turn your attention towards gathering again. Lots of you have answered the poll questions. In a moment, I would like to ask those answers to be displayed to the group as we're coming back together. Okay. Great, thank you. Let me go over these just briefly. As you can see, we designed the poll questions to focus on the topics that we're covering in the curriculum today. So the first question was, can you state your organization's mission statement? Most people are ready to do that and discuss what their organization is here to do. 93% yes. 7% said no, and that's not an uncommon position to be in, especially if you haven't taken time to put together language around that. That's a task that lies before all of us as we're looking at preparing language for grant proposals. The second question is related to our broader topic of climate and disaster resilience. The question is your organization planning to prepare a proposal for climate or disaster? 30% said yes, 70% said no. Again, this is a great place to be at as you consider what options are a fit with your organizational capacity and your understanding of your community's need. The last question is your organization currently ready to address unmet needs in your community? 88% who responded said yes, 12% who responded said no. Again, I just want to uphold the reality that both of these might be true about your organization. It is a common place to be in that you're aware of community need that you haven't yet developed capacity to address. In fact, that may be the area in which you're seeking grant funding. So thank you everyone for sharing just a little bit about where you're at today in terms of organizational capability and your vision for the future in projects, community needs, grant-funded projects. Thank you. Okay. We'll close that poll and move on to our second topic. Our second topic today is needs assessment, making your case. I'd like to introduce our presenter, Maria Griffin of Spo-ka'nay Enterprises. She's a citizen of the Spokane Tribe of Indians and a descendant of the Moses Band of the Colville Confederated Tribes. Her company name, Spo-ka'nay, is derived from the interior Salish name of Spokane. Maria and I have worked together for about 15 years in Spokane, Washington, and she has an incredible history of providing training and technical assistance to Native American tribes, nonprofits, and community-based organizations of all sizes. So she's really a perfect fit for the organizational capacity building activities that we're undertaking here in the Climate Capacity Building Project. Maria, I'm pleased to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, for that great introduction. Hello, I'm Maria Griffin, and welcome to the presentation on needs assessment, making your case. Next slide, please. As we saw earlier, we are talking about the statement of need. So next slide, please. The overview includes intro to data and needs. Data is not as scary as it seems, and then we'll summarize the presentation by going over some tips, which are basically some do's and don'ts, or don'ts and do's for needs assessments. Next slide, please. So we're starting with the intro to data and needs. Okay, next slide, please. So we know that the goal of the proposal is to win fundraising for the project, but where did the project come from? In Diane's presentation, she spoke of aligning the organization's mission with the purpose of the funding opportunity. To connect the organizational capacity with the statement of need, we need to follow the project development. We begin project development by identifying a problem related to the organization's mission. This is where we connect the organizational capacity with the statement of need. After the problem is identified, then a solution to the problem needs to be found. Looking back at your previous proposals, did the proposal tell the project's solution story? Next slide, please. Why is a needs assessment important? Because needs assessment clearly and concisely shows that a problem does exist. It tells the project's solution story. It establishes a data-driven foundation for acting, such as project or program planning or seeking funding. It gathers accurate data about community concerns, issues, and problems. It also prioritizes the community concerns, issues, and problems so that one can be solved at a time according to the importance of the community. Next slide, please. Before we continue, it's important to discuss the types of needs. The normative needs are standards set by experts, and these examples could include housing standards or education standard testing such as SATs. Felt needs are wants, wishes, and desires that are perceived by the individual as important, but not essential for living or well-being. These can change over time. Express needs, vocalize, or how services are used. Basically, these are needs that people have acted on. However, remember, not all people with needs seek help. And real needs are required for survival, such as food, water, air, shelter, clothing, and medical care. These do not change over time. Next slide, please. So where do we begin? Now that we've covered the connection among organizational capacity, statement of need, solution story, and types of needs, let's discuss where to begin with needs assessment. We need to define the project problem. To identify the problem, we need to enlist the help of the community. Ask them what they think the major problem or issue is that needs to be solved or addressed. Develop the key question, basically state the specific problem that the project will focus on. Again, you can enlist the community to help come up with the key question to answer or identify the specific problem that the project will solve. Identify the population, community sectors, and the area to be served by the project. The community can help with identifying who and where in the community faces the greatest impact from the problem and that the project will serve. Identify community components such as nutrition, employment, and preparedness. Part of identifying the problem will also identify the community components that will focus on the project. Next slide, please. Continuing on where to begin, let's look at developing questions to ask for each community component. And then we'll be determining the existing primary and secondary data sources to support the key question and solutions, such as program or organizational data that has been collected previously. And also determine the data collection methods for the new data. So for example, if employment is a community component, that's a very broad category. How can it be narrowed? We'll discuss this in the next section about data. Next slide, please. Data is not as scary as it seems. Next slide, please. Oops, sorry, I lost my place. Okay, so let's start with the importance of data. So data sorts the number of problems in the community to the one that needs immediate attention. It also demonstrates or shows the problem's level of existence in the community, who and where it impacts, and it also answers the key question or questions. As I mentioned earlier, data establishes the foundation for the needs assessment. It basically provides credibility for your project solution. Up until late December 2019, the rule of thumb for data collection was the previous 5 years. However, with the pandemic, that rule no longer works. Many organizations found that the pandemic skewed the data for over 2.5 years. Now, grant writers and project developers must contend with pre- and post-pandemic data. In a way, it can be used to your advantage by comparing the data before the pandemic and after to show the differences in the community and what problems or issues have arisen because of the pandemic. Next slide, please. Let's look at the different sources of data by starting with primary data. As you can see here, primary data is original data that is collected by the community or the organization itself. It can be specifically designed for understanding and solving the problem. The source of primary data can be collected through the surveys or questionnaires, individual interviews or focus groups, as well as observations made by researchers. The information that is collected directly from the community is valuable for identifying, understanding, and solving the problem. Next slide, please. Secondary data, on the other hand, is existing data from outside sources and other researchers, agencies, or organizations. The source of these data can be found in reports, peer-reviewed journal articles, studies, public records, etc. Secondary data adds credibility to your solution by supporting your primary data. It's very important that you cite all secondary data according to the funder's preferred citation style. If you don't know what their style is, ask them. Next slide, please. Let's look a little closer at data sources and methods. Sources can include health, demographics, economic health, education, crime and safety, environment, as well as youth development. These sources can be found at health districts, justice departments, etc. Methods to collect data include surveys, interviews, focus groups, observations, and document or records reviews. Be aware that document and records reviews can be very time-consuming. Setting a timeline for data collection will assist in keeping on track for the proposal completion. Next slide, please. The next area of data interest are types of data. The first type is quantitative, and quantitative is measurable and involves counting. It refers to numerical data. Examples include age in years, height in feet or meters, or number of people. The slides that follow are examples of quantitative data that can be provided in a proposal. Next slide, please. This first slide is on income level, and the table has 6 columns and 5 rows. The first column describes the ratio of income to poverty level. Columns 2 and 3 show the service area data in numbers and percentage. Column 4 shows county data in percentage, as well as column 5 showing state data in percentage. And finally, column 6 shows federal data in percentage as well. The first row is the descriptor of the table, ratio of income to poverty level. Row 2 is labeled as below 100% Federal Poverty Guidelines, or FPG. Row 3 is 100% to 199% FPG, and row 4 is the total population for whom poverty status is determined. And row 5 is the cited source of the secondary information provided in the table. Now, this table is actually a combination of quantitative data, which is numerical, and qualitative data, which is text-based, which we'll talk about shortly. It describes the types of ratios of income to poverty level, which is text-based within with the numerical and percentage data given for the service area. Service area, county, state, and federal data. The source cited is credible as it is the U.S. Census Bureau. To bring this data into context, the grant writer can compare the service area data to the county, state, and other federal data for the reader to show how the data shows the service area problem. Excuse me here for a second. Something popped up on my screen and it's distracting me. I apologize for that. Okay. For example, poverty is an important issue in our service area as seen in the table. The service area percentage for below 100% of the FPG is 20.9%, which is 1.7% more than the county, 4.5% more than the state, and 5.3% more in the country. One thing that Diane brought up was putting this in context, and I'll talk about this in just a moment. Next slide, please.
Maria, I have
Yeah?
a note from our interpreter to please slow down a little if you can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I will. Thank you, Sarah, for that. Okay, so this slide is the educational level data. And as you can see, it is set up like the one we just reviewed on the income level. I won't go into as much detail as the previous slide, but you can see the similarities between them. It gives a descriptor of educational attainment. It shows the service area number, percent, the county numbers in percent, the state and the federal numbers also in percent. Next slide, please. So limitations for quantitative data do exist. And this is something that Diane also mentioned earlier too, that numerical data do not tell the importance of lived experiences. And that's why for every graphic, table, chart, etc., that has quantified data, you need to connect the data to the community by telling the story of the results from the unemployment, low education attainment, poverty, pandemic, access to medical services, etc. This was what brings context to your proposal and your narrative that you're writing. Next slide, please. This brings us to the qualitative data, which is the story or text-based data behind the numbers. It brings the human element to the numbers so that the common experiences shared by all community members are provided. Qualitative data can describe the values, norms, standards, customs, identity, and cultural heritage or heritages of the community. It tells a story about how the solution is going to help the community get through and solve this problem. Sarah, could you check with Andrea to see if I'm going slow enough now? I'm sorry I got so fast earlier. I was excited about my topic. Next slide, please.
Andrea says your speed is okay. Thank you,
Okay.
Maria.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so there we go. In this slide, I provide an example of a story-based data. The numbers here are fictional, so don't take them as real. I made them up. Our community is in a remote, rural part of Ferry County. The people who live here work in the timber, agricultural, or service industries. Approximately 60% of the community self-identify mixed race between Caucasian, American Indian, and or African American. For example, our community holds 4 celebrations, 1 per quarter, that celebrates our mixed heritage with powwows, street fairs, food fairs, and picnics. Next slide, please. As we saw in the example of the qualitative data in the previous slide, it is generally non-numerical and describes event observations when you do not use numbers. We also saw this in the quantitative data examples when the tables were described. Linking both the numbers to the narrative to give context to the information. This is very important. Don't assume that your audience will automatically link those two together. You have to tell them what they need to know about your community. Qualitative data can be collected from text, audio, and images, then shared using data visualization tools such as word clouds, timelines, concept maps, and infographics. In the slides that follow, you'll see examples of a word cloud and a timeline. Next slide, please. This word cloud is designed to demonstrate through the size of the word the number of times the word was counted in a document, such as an interview, survey, etc. The larger the size of the word, the more times the word was counted. For example, the largest word in is qualitative, with the second as analysis. In addition to size, color can be used, as you can see in this image. Next slide, please. The timeline example shows a timeline with different decades from 1980 all the way to 2020. And within each of these decades, you have a point within the time that would show information about that point in time that is relevant to your solution story. Next slide, please. Data resources links are on this slide as promised earlier. These links can provide you with valuable information on assessment toolkit templates, data guides, data for environmental information, etc. Next slide, please. To summarize the presentation, we'll go over some tips. Next slide, please. Some pitfalls to avoid include vague intentions. Always be very clear about your project goal, the problem it will solve, the data to prove that it can be solved, and this is important, how it will be solved. That's one thing funders always look for is how. Wordiness can confuse the narrative. Always be concise when writing your narrative. Being wordy can be detrimental, as most funders, unfortunately, put a character, word, or page limit to their submission requirements. Keep the prepositional phrases to a minimum. That's important because a lot of the wordiness comes from using prepositional phrases. Jargon is only welcome in the circle where it belongs. Not everyone is an expert in your community or organization and may not understand the words and jargon that you may be using, so try not to use them very much. Abbreviations can become confusing, especially if the narrative has too many. If your sentence reads as a mixed up alphabet, it's time to spell out the abbreviation to make the information clear. And don't assume that the funder knows your community. You are the expert on your organization, your community, the problem, and the solution. Complete explanations are welcome, and be sure you use descriptors so that the funder can understand who it is, when, what you are describing. Next slide, please. Can't say this enough. Embrace the expertise about your organization, community, and its needs. I think between Diane and I, we've said that about 10 times now, so that is a very important thing. Next slide, please. Some other tips to consider include taking time to clearly identify and narrow the problem to one single problem to be solved. If you have too many problems, the funder cannot understand or focus on what it is that you're asking for. Clearly identify the key question or questions. Set limits on how much data will be collected and analyzed. Set a timeline for collecting data. Clearly describe your community as if the reader has not visited you. Next slide, please. Focus on what is essential to know versus what is good to know to answer key questions. And be aware you may not be able to answer all the questions. Document your data collection efforts, such as identifying sources primary or secondary, as well as documenting your secondary sources using the citation style preferred by the funder. This database will allow you to find the information you need as you write your proposal. And focus on quality rather than quantity. This is especially true if the timeline to collect data is very short. Next slide, please. And lastly, something to consider. A social condition is an objective statement. Poverty level income is an objective fact. 30% of families of 4 have incomes less than $21,800 per year. A social problem is a subjective statement. Poverty is a social problem when it is judged as negative, harmful, dangerous, or unacceptable. The social problem is our interpretation of the condition, and this is what we propose to address, basically the story of the solution. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'll turn this over to Sarah to facilitate the Q&A portion of this presentation. Sarah?
Great. Thank you, Maria. This is Sarah speaking again. And this is our question and answer period specifically for needs, data, needs assessment, anything that Maria mentioned or alluded to, we can discuss now. So if you have a question, this again is a time where if you raise your hand electronically, we'll invite you to unmute and speak to the group. I'm going to pull a comment out of the chat box, which is thank you for homing in on the subjective versus the objective. Sometimes it's easy to fudge the two. And I was really noticing that in your last slide, Maria, where you were explaining the difference between stating a single number and making a value judgment about it or explaining what the number meant. I also noticed it in the tables where it was set up to clearly compare numbers between different areas. All of those pieces kind of add to telling the story about what's important in your data and your numbers that you may be fortunate enough to have to present in a needs section.
Yeah, I've always found it important to make sure that if you do have data, numbers, that it always needs to be put in context because, as important as data numbers are, people tend to use them in a way that they need to, sometimes wrongly, and or they mention them incorrectly. And for needs assessments, to connect the numbers to what's happening actually in the community is very important because I mentioned earlier, not all the funders, well, let's just say all funders don't know what's going on in your community. And as Diane and I've said over, like I said, over 10 times so far, you are the expert in your community. And so you know how those numbers are reflected correctly in your community. Thank you.
We've got a raised hand from Mariko of Cambodia Town. Please ask us your question. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Maria. That was an excellent presentation and very, very helpful. One of the things that your presentation underscored for my community is how difficult it is to have quantitative data, which is not disaggregated by community. And so I'm glad you offered one possible solution if we have enough time, which is to gather or get data from our own community, and that be good data to present in a proposal. Because we're always saying, our group, but I guess we need to quantify that even more. It's very difficult to get, numbers for the Cambodian community. And I'm sure some of the other Asian communities have the same problem.
Thank you, Mariko. Yes, this is Maria. On some of the work that I have done with Gary Bess Associates, it is difficult to find data on specific, like you said, Cambodia, your group and stuff. And sometimes you may have to go out to your community, maybe stop at the clinics that they mostly go to and ask them if they have any information on demographics that they'd be willing to share. Or, you might have to set up your own research and ask your community, please, we need the numbers to help us fill out forms or opportunities so we can bring more money to our community to help. I've always found working with tribal communities and other smaller communities that once the community understands how important it is to gather that data and to be engaged in actually collecting that data, they help. Practically 95% of them will come in and help that collect that data and keep it current. They will try to keep it current so that they know that those numbers will help them in the long run. And like, as I said, with the pre-pandemic and the post-pandemic numbers now, it might be a good time to go in and do that and ask some questions about the pandemic, like how has it, how has it affected you, and what differences have you seen pre and post pandemic? And then that will give you a lot of numbers and a lot of data to help with any opportunities you may come across. So thank you for your question, Mariko.
I've got a question. This is Sarah speaking again. I've got a question related to that, which is, can you tell us any more about how community involvement might work when you're talking about questions of gathering data?
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, this is Maria. There's a couple of things that I've used in the past. This is pre-pandemic, of course, on gathering community data, is looking for those community leaders, those who have sway in getting people to come together within your community to help. They can be elders, they can be youngsters, they can be people who have a real passion for ensuring that their community is taken care of. And having them come in to your organization, explaining what you need, why you want the information, and pretty much having them be the champion of the community and asking them for connections within the community to help move this through. It takes a while because it's a relationship building exercise, and there are some people who don't want to participate because they don't think the relationship building will work, because they've seen in the past where they may have built a bridge and that bridge is basically torn away and that trust was broken. So if you have broken trust in the past with your community, it's time to mend those fences, and it's going to take a while. Don't expect it to happen overnight or within a week or two. It's going to take months. Be aware too, find out what their actual communication protocols are. And what I mean by that is that not everybody uses emails, not everybody uses texts. Some people like to speak face to face. Some people like to use their phone. Find out what communication avenues you can use to provide for outreach, and start inviting people. Bring them into gatherings without asking them for money or asking them for information. Just introduce yourself to the community. Have little gatherings where people come along. Have a little, maybe just a one question survey that they can answer, like, what is the most important problem you see in the community? And that's your first step in gathering data. You gather all that data, and then you send out an email letting people, hey, thanks for attending our so many gatherings. We collected this much information, and we look forward to hearing from you on what you think is the most important of this list that we've gathered. And you just keep on with the gatherings, and you bring everybody together, and eventually you will have a top 5 list, where you ask people, finally you narrowed it down to 5 out of, maybe you collected 50 responses or 50 different problems. And then when you gather everybody down for 5 responses, then you have a larger gathering, and you bring people in. And this is a fun thing that I've done several times before with other organizations, is that you give everybody some play money or monopoly money, and you have baskets underneath each of the responses that you have of your top 5. And you ask your people, okay, community, buy what you want your problem to be. Spend all your money. You can put it all in one basket, or you can spread it around between the 5, whatever. And then you can have them ask volunteers to come along and count up all the money once that's taken care of. And then people see that the first problem that will be solved is the one that has the most money, the second amount, and so on, until they see and that this is the priority of the problems that are to be solved. And in discussion with the community, you can determine with them if those problems can be solved all in 1 year, or if they can be solved in 2 years, 3 years, or 1 a year. However, that is a simple way of doing a strategic planning session with your community on determining the problems or needs that need to be solved first. I think I talked too much. Anyway, if you have any questions, that's what I do for community engagement. It is a long process. It's a relationship building exercise, and that's something that everybody should be doing with their communities. Thank you, Sarah.
This is Sarah speaking again. I love the monopoly money exercise. And obviously, as Maria explained, there's a lot that goes into making a gathering of that type possible, a lot of groundwork that needs to be laid. But I think, you know, the opportunity for community members to put out their monopoly money in based on their choices about need and importance of solutions is very concrete and easy for people to understand, and a good way to engage. I want to lift up one more comment that I'm seeing in the chat. Do take a look inside the chat if you haven't. We're having links and articles being shared in there, so there may be topics of interest. But the comment I wanted to read was, we're shifting to talking about community needs in terms of asset-based framing, talking about the strengths communities have to solve these problems they face. And for me, I know that when it comes to the question of need or even community characteristics, there can be long and painful history about how communities have been described that can really complicate this process of describing a situation in the present time in order to communicate with the funder. Maria, I wonder if you can comment there. I know it's a big topic.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, this is Maria. Yeah, it is a big topic. Switching from to a strengths based, it requires a lot of thinking about, this is what we have, but we have a gap here to meet. It's basically comparing the data, comparing your own community data, let's say about unemployment. You do a survey and you find that your single mothers have, like, maybe 60% of your single mothers who work do not have living wage jobs. And it's due to the fact that they hadn't had a chance to complete their education. Maybe they need at least an AA degree. And to meet the same level of educational attainment within the county, the state, or the federal government, there's a gap that needs to be bridged. So what you say is something like, our community is very strong in culture, it's very strong in family, it's very strong with these things. However, because of certain circumstances, there are not enough living wage jobs for our single mothers. And especially to overcome the poverty guidelines that we have and the educational guidelines that we have due to these numbers. And to provide our single mothers with a living wage, we want to build a workforce training that provides childcare so that they can, and a stipend so that they can learn a new skill that is feasible in our community, as well as provide childcare so they don't have to worry about working and going to school at the same time. So something like that is that you're not being down about, oh, poor us, we have, all these people who can't do this. You're just explaining, you're taking the time to explain how those circumstances happened or why those circumstances are, and you compare it to the rest of the county the state or the nation. And if you can see that difference, that, oh, that community doesn't have the opportunities that the other state communities or other federal communities have, and they've got a pretty good idea of how to solve that problem. So that would be a strength-based thing. I think that might help answer. It's kind of an iffy thing. The federal government started changing that language back about maybe several years ago, going towards a strength-based, and it's made it hard for people to look at it that way. Instead of saying problem statement, they're now saying, what is your long-term community goal? What is the current community condition? Things like that. That's the kind of different verbiage that you'll find in notice of opportunities now.
Thanks, Maria.
Mhm.
This is Sarah again. I see a question in the chat box from Michelle Monlow. Michelle, I wonder if you can unmute yourself and ask us your question.
Hello, hi. So I haven't written the proposal yet, but I did see a question on one I was looking at, and there was a question about if there were other agencies or partners you're going to work with, and should you list those names if you've made contacts with them previously for other reasons, but it would be kind of connected in the same way, maybe you haven't had an MOU or anything like that with these other agencies, but you're kind of just in touch with each other, assisting one another because you have similar programs, and you've been working with each other on referring, different clients or whatever it is. Should you put those names in there without getting their permission, or should you reach out to them and say, hey, I'm writing this proposal, and is it okay if we list you as a partner, a potential partner, or another agency that we're working with?
Thank you, Michelle. That's a great question. This is Maria again. And yes, you will find, not just in the one you've looked at, but a lot of funders and agencies at the federal and state level are asking for people to partner with one another, mostly to see how far they can share their resources. And it's not just human resources, but material resources and maybe certain things that are needed that can complement one another in a grant. I suggest that you reach out to them, Michelle, share the notice of opportunity with them, tell them that you're interested in them and interested in this funding, and ask them if they would like to be a partner with you. Or if, and you would definitely have to put an MOU together for that, because you'll probably find later on in that notice of funding opportunity that you need to attach any memorandums of understanding or agreement where it shows that you do have a partnership in place. Now, that again is a relationship thing, and it sounds like you got a good relationship going with them. I don't see any problems with that. Both of you might want to go ahead and apply for it at the same time, but using each other as one is a prom and the other one is other. That way, it shows that you guys are willing to work together on it. And if one doesn't get it, then the other gets it, and vice versa. So maybe you both will get it, and it'll serve your communities a little bit stronger. So I hope that helps answer your question.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
This is Sarah speaking again, and we're almost at the end of our time together, so I need to move us forward, unfortunately. Too bad we can't have more discussion on this. I want to end with just a brief reminder of resources related to grant writing and capacity development that are available on the Climate Capacity website. This has been mentioned several times in the chat box. You probably already clicked through to it. We have a new listing of funding opportunities available specifically related to climate programs. In addition, we have the opportunity to make an appointment for one-on-one technical assistance related to your grant capacity, a specific opportunity you're looking at. It's a place where you can continue with us discussing the types of questions that might come up in a webinar like today's. All right. We're going to place a link to the survey in the chat box right now. Please click the link to open it and share your thoughts with us on today's webinar. We're grateful for any feedback that you're willing to provide. It helps us design the technical assistance to make it fit your needs better. And we hope that we'll see you back again for the remaining webinars in this series. They're on April 25th, May 7th, and May 14th. And recordings for all of these will be available afterwards on the Climate Capacity website. Thank you to our presenters for the wonderful information that you shared. Thank you to everyone for being here and for discussing today. Our webinar is concluding, and so you can disconnect whenever you're ready. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.